My son's wife banned me from their wedding. So I walked in late, not to attend, but to serve them eviction papers, right at the reception. It still sounds ridiculous when I say it out loud, like something from a bad courtroom drama or an overdone revenge story. But it wasn't fiction. It was my reality. A reality that unfolded slowly, quietly, and painfully, long before the actual wedding ever took place. You see, I raised Adam with everything I had. After my wife passed, it was just the two of us. I worked overtime, cut back on my own meals to pay for his school lunches, sold my truck when college bills came up. He was my world. I never once imagined I'd be uninvited from the biggest day of his life. The first sign came subtly. Too subtly. He stopped answering calls. Said he was busy with wedding stuff. I figured that made sense. Planning a wedding is stressful. But then came the slip-ups. A friend of mine mentioned seeing Brooke's bridal shower photos online from the house I'd given them. Looks like they're going all out, she said. I smiled, nodded, acted like I was in the loop. I wasn't. A week later, I got the text from Brooke, not Adam. Just a few lines that changed everything. Dennis, for the sake of a smooth ceremony, we think it's best if you sit this one out. Hope you understand. No please, no phone call, just a cold one-way message. We think it's best if you sit this one out. I stared at it until my coffee went cold. I reread it until my hands went warm with rage. I didn't respond. I didn't beg for a seat at the ceremony. I didn't ask why. Instead, I stood up, walked to the fridge, and looked at the one piece of paper still held up by a magnet, the title deed. My name, clear as day, stamped in ink. I gave them that house, and in return, they gave me silence. That's when I stopped being the forgiving father and started becoming something else entirely. Adam wasn't always like this. There was a time when he'd race into my arms after school with scraped knees and paint on his hands, proudly showing off a stick figure drawing of our little family, me, him, and Maria. That boy used to beg me to make his favorite fried eggs on Sunday mornings, and he'd sit beside me on the roof when I fixed the shingles, pretending to help just so we could talk. We didn't have much growing up, but we had each other, and that was enough. I worked every job that came my way. Residential wiring, appliance repair, late-night emergency fixes in freezing weather, just to keep him stable. Maria and I agreed on one thing. No matter how hard life got, Adam would have a better chance. So when she passed away, I promised myself I'd make sure her dream for him didn't die with her. I was the one who paid for his textbooks when his financial aid didn't cover them. When he couldn't find work after college, I hired him to help with my side jobs, never once charging him rent, even when he moved back in. I fed him, clothed him, and told him over and over again, "You are not a burden, son. You are my purpose." So when he called me 5 years ago to say he and Brooke were ready to move in together, I didn't hesitate. I handed him the keys to the second property I owned, a modest 2-bedroom on the north side, the one I'd fixed up after retirement. He was overwhelmed, grateful, even cried a little on the phone. "I don't know what I did to deserve this, Dad." I told him, "You were born. That's enough." That house? It was meant to be a gift, a symbol of how far we'd come. I paid the taxes, I paid for the repairs, I paid for the new appliances when Brooke said the old ones didn't match her aesthetic. They smiled, took it all, and slowly, steadily, the calls became less frequent. My advice stopped mattering. I wasn't Dad anymore. I was just the man who paid the bills, until even that wasn't enough. I remember the first time I met Brooke. She came to my house for dinner, wearing a sleek white dress, heels too high for the cracked walkway, and a smile that never quite reached her eyes. Adam was glowing beside her, laughing louder than usual, as if trying to prove something. I shook her hand, and she gave me one of those polite nods people reserve for strangers they're not planning to know for long. She was nice. Not warm, just nice. The kind of nice that feels like a tight handshake and air kisses. She complimented my cooking, said the beans were rustic, and stared at Maria's old photos like they belonged in someone else's house. When she left that night, she told Adam, not me, "Next time, maybe your dad can get rid of that tablecloth. It's a bit vintage." The tablecloth Maria had embroidered by hand. That was my first clue. I wanted to believe it was nerves, that she'd warm up over time. But the second time they visited, she didn't sit, just walked through the house like she was appraising it, asked if I planned to modernize the kitchen, said the cabinets looked very 90s. I told her those cabinets were installed by hand, by me, and she smiled like I'd said something adorable.
Adam didn't notice. Or maybe he did, and ignored it. He kept changing. Slowly, subtly. He started calling less, texting instead of visiting. When he did come by, Brooke was always with him, always in a rush, always with somewhere else to be. He stopped staying for dinner. Then he stopped coming at all. And when I did see them, it was in passing. Drop-offs, drive-bys, always scheduled, always brief. Like they were doing me a favor just by stopping in. Brooke took over everything. His schedule, his decisions, his priorities, and Adam, my son, the boy who once held my hand crossing the street, was now too busy to pick up the phone. Too busy to say thank you. Too busy to notice how far we drifted. She didn't just marry him. She absorbed him. And somewhere in that quiet, invisible process, I stopped being a father and started becoming a formality. The house was supposed to be their beginning. It became my ending. I'd spent years working side jobs after retirement to buy that second property. A quiet 2-bedroom with a decent yard, a new roof and strong bones. It wasn't flashy, but it was solid, like everything I tried to build for my family. I didn't give it to Adam and Brooke as a loan. I didn't ask for rent. I handed him the keys and said, "Make it yours. Build your life here." They took the offer without hesitation. Adam cried, Brooke smiled. I thought it meant something. I thought maybe it would pull us closer, like giving him that house would somehow keep me in their orbit. But after they moved in, it was like I'd been erased from the blueprint. At first, it was small things. The mailbox still had my name on it, and one day I drove by and saw it painted over. No text, just blacked out. A new wreath hung on the front door, clean, sterile, impersonal. Brooke posted a picture of the living room online with the caption, "Our first home, built from the ground up with love and hard work." I stared at that post for a long time. No mention of who paid for the renovations, who funded the down payment, who signed the original papers. They redid the floors, the ones I'd laid myself, tore down the fence I built with Adam when he was 12. When I asked him about it, he said Brooke wanted it to feel like ours, not a hand-me-down. A hand-me-down. That's what he called the house I bought him. The house I gave him when I had every reason to sell it and retire in peace. But I didn't. I gave it freely, with love. And now, I wasn't even welcome at the table inside it. What hurt more than the changes was the way they never looked back. They made it theirs by pretending it never came from me. Like I was the ghost in the walls. Invisible, unspoken, unnecessary. And still I stayed silent. Still I swallowed the hurt, until they made it clear I wasn't just unwelcome in their home. I wasn't even welcome in their lives. It came on a Tuesday. I was fixing the leak under my kitchen sink when my phone buzzed. I wiped my hands on a towel and saw the name light up the screen. Brooke. She rarely texted me. In fact, I couldn't remember the last time she did. For a moment I thought maybe, just maybe, she was reaching out with an olive branch. But hope is a dangerous thing. Dennis, we think it's best if you don't attend the wedding. There's been tension, and we just want the day to be smooth and drama-free. I hope you understand. No Mr. Flores. No Dad. Just Dennis. And a statement dressed up like a favor. Like exile wrapped in lace. I stood there, holding my phone, not sure whether to laugh or scream. My son didn't send it. He didn't even have the spine to call. He let her speak for both of them. We think it's best. Who's we? The couple building a life inside my house with my money, my blessings, and now my silence? I didn't respond. What was there to say? I sat back in my chair, staring at the dusty floor tiles. I could hear the kitchen clock ticking behind me, each second like a drumbeat. I remembered Maria hanging that clock, tilting it just so, telling me it would help Adam learn to read time. How ironic. All these years later, and now it was time that had taught me something. When people show you who they are, believe them. I thought of the suit I had hanging in the closet, the one I planned to wear for the wedding. I had it cleaned and pressed, ready to go. A blue tie, Maria's favorite color. I thought about the gift I'd bought, too. An engraved watch for Adam. Something symbolic, a gesture, a memory.
Instead, I turned off my phone and sat in silence. They'd made a decision, and now, so had I. The night after that message, I didn't eat dinner. Not out of protest, not to be dramatic. I just didn't feel like it. I made a cup of tea, sat at the kitchen table, and stared at the wall like it might blink back at me. The house was quiet. Too quiet. No laughter, no footsteps, no distant voice from the other room asking me where the remote was. Just the ticking of the clock Maria hung up years ago, still a little crooked. I opened the old wooden drawer near the pantry, the one that always sticks, and pulled out the photo album. It hadn't been touched in years. Dust curled around the edges, but the memories inside were as sharp as ever. There he was, Adam, 5 years old, smiling, with chocolate on his face after a birthday cake he'd helped me bake. Another one, him standing proudly in front of his first bike, both knees scraped from trying all day. And then one from college, his arms around me at graduation. He had tears in his eyes that day. Said, I couldn't have done this without you, Dad. Now I wasn't even good enough to sit at his wedding. I flipped through the pages, stopping at one that always hit me hardest. Maria holding baby Adam on our old couch. Her smile was tired, but full. She looked happy, proud, like the hard life we'd built was finally starting to bloom. I remembered her voice, gentle but unshakable. Don't ever let the world convince you that kindness makes you weak, she used to say. But don't let people walk on you just because you're willing to carry them. I'd carried Adam. My whole life I carried him. And now I was being shoved out of the frame like I never mattered. I closed the album and sat in the dim kitchen light, tea gone cold beside me. I didn't feel anger, not yet. What I felt was a slow, heavy certainty settling in my chest. Like concrete. Something had ended, not because I walked away, but because they closed the door. And now it was time for me to stop knocking. It was around midnight when I got up from the table. I hadn't planned on moving. I thought I'd sit there all night, letting the silence wrap around me like a winter coat. But something inside shifted. Not with anger, not with hate, just resolve. A click, like a light switch. That moment when mourning turns into meaning. I walked down the hall, past the closed door of what used to be Adam's room. It still smelled faintly like pencil shavings and teenage cologne. I opened the filing cabinet in the hallway, the one Maria insisted we keep just in case. Tucked in the back, under old tax returns and water bills from over a decade ago, was a yellow envelope. Thick, crisp, labeled in Maria's handwriting. Second property. Deed. I opened it, and there it was,
My name, my signature, my ownership. No co-signers, no shared titles, just me. I stood there holding that document like it was some ancient artifact. In a way, it was. Proof that I hadn't imagined the sacrifices, that I hadn't dreamed up the second job I took at 58 just to finish paying off that place. The years I gave up vacations, skipped doctor's visits, worked through holidays, for them, for that house, for Adam. But now? Now it would serve a different purpose.
I didn't feel vengeful. This wasn't about revenge. It was about restoration, about balance, about finally choosing myself after years of being chosen last. They'd built a fantasy on my foundation and decided I wasn't good enough to be part of it. Fine. But I wasn't going to let them pretend they built it alone. I gently returned the deed to the envelope, walked it back to the kitchen, and set it on the counter like a loaded weapon. Not to hurt anyone, but to end the war they started with a text. I stared at it for a long time. Then I poured myself another cup of tea. This time, I drank it hot, because tomorrow I'd call someone I hadn't spoken to in years, my lawyer. The next morning, I woke up earlier than usual. I didn't need an alarm. My mind had already been wide awake long before the sun showed up. The kettle whistled on the stove while I sat in my chair, staring at the yellow envelope resting quietly on the kitchen counter. No rage, no hesitation, just the kind of clarity that settles deep in your bones after you've been ignored for long enough. At 8:01 a.m., I dialed the number I hadn't used in years. Carter and Wells, this is Michelle speaking. Hi, yes, I'd like to schedule an appointment with Mr. Wells regarding property ownership and tenant notice. This is Dennis Flores. There was a brief pause, then a warm familiarity in her tone. Of course, Mr. Flores. We can get you in at 11:30 today. Is that all right? Perfect, I said. I got dressed like I used to when I was still running my own repair company. Collared shirt, polished shoes. I even shaved. There's something about preparing for dignity that makes you want to look the part. I wasn't going to court today, but I was stepping back into a version of myself I hadn't visited in a while. The man who handled his own business, quietly, firmly. Mr. Wells was older now, just like me, but his handshake was still solid. We sat across from each other in a quiet office filled with years of paper wisdom. I handed him the deed, a printed copy of Brooks' text, and a breakdown of what I'd spent over the years on that house, from the down payment to every utility bill I'd covered temporarily. He didn't say much at first, just nodded, read everything twice, and made notes in a leather-bound pad. Dennis, he said finally, what you're doing is completely within your rights. That's all I needed to hear. He slid a folder across the desk. We'll issue a formal notice of eviction. 30 days. You're not terminating a lease. You're ending a generous act that was never repaid. I left that office with more than a letter. I left with a plan. They gave me a text. I was giving them paper. The wedding day came with perfect skies and mild weather, one of those deceptively peaceful days that almost dares you to stay quiet. But I wasn't staying quiet anymore. I'd been tracking the timeline through whispers, Facebook posts, and indirect updates. The ceremony was at a vineyard on the edge of town, high-end, Instagram perfect, the kind of place where champagne is poured before the bride even walks in. The reception was set for 6 o'clock sharp, and according to the seating chart Brooke posted online, yes, she actually posted it, I wasn't listed anywhere. Not even in the back row, not even as a distant observer. They wanted distance? Fine, I'd give it to them. Right up until the exact moment I didn't. I shaved again that morning, wore my best navy suit, not the one I picked for the wedding. That one still hung untouched in the closet like a ghost of the day I imagined. No, today I wore the one from Maria's memorial, because this wasn't a celebration, this was a farewell, a final curtain call on the illusion that we were still a family. I left the tie behind. No need for a bow when you're not there to pose. The eviction notice sat folded in a leather briefcase, 3 copies, legally stamped, with the delivery receipt already prepared. I'd also printed a copy of the deed, just in case anyone thought I was bluffing. At 5:45, I pulled into the gravel parking lot and parked 2 rows back. I didn't want to cause a scene. That was never the point. I was simply here to deliver something. After all, I had every right to serve notice in person, especially since they'd made the venue their new social battleground. This wasn't about drama. It was about timing. I sat in the truck for a few minutes, watching guests in suits and dresses pour into the glowing glass reception hall. Laughter floated through the vineyard like perfume. I saw Adam through the window, standing next to Brooke, her hand resting possessively on his chest. I took a breath, reached for the handle, and stepped out. No shaking hands, no announcements. Just a man with a message they thought he'd never have the courage to deliver. I didn't knock. I didn't ask permission. The front doors to the reception hall were wide open, welcoming everyone. Except me, of course. I walked through them without hesitation, the weight of the briefcase in my hand the only thing grounding me. My shoes tapped softly against the polished wood floor as conversations continued. Laughter echoed. Forks clinked against glass. No one noticed me at first. Then Brooke did. She was seated at the sweetheart table beside Adam, wine glass in hand, mid-laugh with someone across the table. Her expression froze as she locked eyes with me. The color drained from her face so fast I almost thought she'd seen a ghost. Maybe, in a way, she had. Adam turned next. His smile vanished. His jaw clenched. I didn't stop walking. There was no speech, no yelling, no scene. I walked calmly up to their table, reached into my briefcase, and pulled out the envelope, clean, crisp, clearly labeled with their names. I placed it gently between the flower arrangements and the untouched wedding favors. 30 days, I said softly. Brooke blinked. What is this? Adam looked at the envelope, but didn't touch it. Dad? No, I said, just loud enough for the nearby guests to hear. You made your choice. Now I'm making mine. The room had gone quiet, just the clinking of one lone champagne glass being set down somewhere. The band in the corner had stopped mid-note. People were staring, whispering. Brooke reached for the envelope like it was a bomb. In a way, it was. Eviction? She read aloud, eyes darting across the page. You're evicting us? Adam's voice dropped. Dad, please, can we talk outside? Outside is exactly where you put me, I replied, steady as a heartbeat. This is just me meeting you there. I didn't wait for a response. I turned around, briefcase now empty, and walked back out the way I came. No shouting followed me, just the buzz of shocked silence and the smell of overcooked filet mignon fading behind me. I didn't need a seat at their table. I had just flipped the table entirely with one sheet of paper. I didn't look back when I walked out of the hall, but I didn't need to. I already knew what I left behind. A room full of whispers, widened eyes, and uncomfortable stares. The kind of quiet that follows truth when it walks into a space built entirely on appearances. That envelope, just a piece of paper to some, was a wrecking ball to the perfect image Adam and Brooke had spent years constructing. I sat in my truck for a while, engine off, hands resting on the steering wheel. Through the glass, I could see the lights flickering inside the reception hall, movement behind the windows, people shifting in their chairs, some guests standing, a few sneaking glances toward the front. Even from a distance, I could feel it, the unraveling. I imagined Brooke fumbling for explanations, her voice tight, her charm cracking like thin ice. She'd probably call it a misunderstanding, a family matter, something to be smoothed over after dessert. But this wasn't about dessert. This was about the truth, finally speaking up in a room where it had been silenced for far too long. They wanted me quiet, invisible, disposable. But the thing about pushing someone into the background for years is, when they finally step forward, the spotlight hits harder than you ever expect. By the time I turned the key in the ignition, my phone had already buzzed 4 times. Adam, then Brooke, then again, Adam. I didn't answer, not out of spite, just out of clarity. This wasn't a negotiation. This wasn't a moment for apologies scripted after embarrassment. This was reality knocking on their curated glass bubble. Let it rattle. Let them feel it. Let them explain to their friends, their co-workers, their carefully selected wedding guests, why the man who paid for their life wasn't good enough to be invited, but was bold enough to show up anyway. Not for food, not for closure, but for justice. And for once, I wasn't the one trying to hold the family together. I was just watching to see if they'd try, now that the illusion was shattered in front of everyone. The next morning, I woke up to 12 missed calls. Adam's name was listed 5 times. Brooke's, 4. 3 were from numbers I didn't recognize, probably her parents or friends trying to mediate. There were also 2 voicemails. I didn't listen to them right away. I made my coffee first, took my time, sat at the kitchen table, folded the local paper, and watched the steam rise from my mug like it was just another Sunday. It wasn't. This was the first morning in 5 years I didn't feel like someone else's backup plan. When I finally opened my voicemail, the first one was Brooke, her voice shaking, but still wrapped in that artificial politeness she used like armor. Dennis, I just think this was completely inappropriate. You've embarrassed Adam and me in front of our guests. There were clients there, friends. You made a scene. I understand if you're upset, but this isn't how adults solve things. I smiled at the irony. She was right. This wasn't how adults solve things. But that's not what she said last week when she disinvited me via text like a canceled dentist appointment. The second voicemail was Adam. Dad, can we please just talk? I didn't know she sent that message until after. I didn't know you were coming. Please. Let's talk before lawyers get more involved. This has gone too far. Lawyers? That told me everything. They weren't reaching out for reconciliation. They were trying to stop the bleeding. Later that afternoon, I got a call from a number I knew all too well. Brooke's father. We had only spoken a handful of times before. He'd always treated me like someone who was lucky just to be breathing near their family name. Dennis, you may think what you did was justified, but I assure you it won't go unanswered. You've humiliated our family. You think a piece of paper scares me? I've dealt with far worse than you. I said nothing, hung up before he finished his threat. He was right about one thing. A piece of paper shouldn't scare anyone, unless it tells the truth. People ask why I didn't say anything sooner, why I didn't speak up when the disrespect started, why I didn't push back when Brooke rolled her eyes at my opinions or when Adam stopped inviting me to dinners, birthdays, holidays, why I kept handing over money, time, support, even when it was clear I was being phased out like an old appliance. The answer is simple. I stayed quiet because I believe that's what love does. Love doesn't storm into a room demanding attention. It waits, it hopes, it assumes the best. And I loved my son more than I loved my own pride. There were 1,000 small moments I could have spoken up, but didn't. When they changed the locks without telling me, when I found out from someone else that they hosted Thanksgiving and I wasn't even offered leftovers. When Adam canceled our lunch plans 3 times in a row because Brooke had booked something, I stayed silent through all of it. Not because I was weak, but because I didn't want to be the reason my son had to choose between his wife and his father. I convinced myself I was doing the noble thing, that by backing off I was giving him space to grow, to become his own man. I thought maybe one day he'd realize I hadn't disappeared. I was just waiting in the background, ready to support him whenever he needed it. But waiting quietly became existing invisibly. And the thing about silence is, it doesn't get you remembered. It gets you replaced. I wasn't trying to be a hero. I wasn't playing some long game. I was just a man who didn't know how to say enough until it was too late. Until I was no longer the father who raised him, but the burden they managed around holidays and obligations. So when Brooke told me I wasn't welcome, it wasn't the first cut. It was the last. And when I served that envelope, it wasn't revenge. It was the only language they had left me to speak. They say numbers don't lie, so when I finally sat down and totaled everything I had given Adam and Brooke over the past 5 years, the truth hit harder than any insult ever could. $42,000 for the down payment on the house, $137,000 in mortgage payments, every single month, auto-deducted from my account without fail. $8,400 in utilities and surprise emergencies. $2,600 for their engagement party.
$5,000 for furniture because Brooke said hand-me-downs wouldn't look right on Instagram. $3,200 for a new roof. $11,000 in temporary help when Adam lost his job for 3 months and Brooke refused to work. Add it all up and you get a number north of $210,000. $210,000. That's more than I made in the first decade of raising Adam. More than Maria and I ever had in savings. That number represented my retirement, my comfort, my safety net. And I gave it willingly, without interest, without strings, without even a thank you most of the time. I gave it because I believed in my son, because I wanted his life to be easier than mine had been, because I thought he'd remember that sacrifice and carry it with him like a shield, protecting the bond between us. But he didn't. They built a life on my back and then acted like I was just part of the foundation, silent, buried, and best left unacknowledged. You see, betrayal doesn't always come in loud arguments or dramatic scenes. Sometimes it arrives in missed phone calls, in holiday invitations that never come, in thank yous that are whispered too late or not at all. That $210,000, it wasn't just money. It was trust. It was love. It was time I'll never get back. Years of maybe next weekend. Years of we've just been so busy. Years of watching my son become someone who believed my silence meant consent. But it didn't. It meant restraint. And now that restraint was gone, not out of spite, but out of self-respect. Maria would have known what to do. She always had a way of seeing people clearly, long before they revealed themselves. Where I gave the benefit of the doubt, she gave gentle warnings, never harsh, never loud, just quiet truths, spoken at the right moment. I still hear her sometimes, in the quiet hours, in the clink of a coffee spoon, in the rustle of the curtain she stitched herself. She would have known this day was coming, not because she distrusted Adam, but because she understood how people change when someone else starts pulling the strings. The first time she met Brooke, Maria leaned over to me after dinner and said, "She sees you as an obstacle, not family." I laughed it off at the time, said she was being too protective. But now? Now I wish I'd listened closer. I think that's what hurt the most, watching Adam forget not just me, but her. The woman who carried him through fevered nights, who stayed awake hand-sewing his Halloween costumes when we couldn't afford store-bought ones. The woman who taught him how to say please and thank you and look someone in the eye when you apologize. He used to light up when we mentioned her.
Now her name doesn't come up at all. Not in their home, not in their stories, as if scrubbing me out of the picture also meant erasing her. I went to the closet last night, pulled down the old shoebox where we kept her letters, the ones she wrote me during our early years when we were just scraping by. One of them said, "If the world ever makes you feel small, just remember, you were enough for me, always." That line stayed with me. It reminded me that dignity doesn't come from applause or invitations or being listed on someone's guest list. It comes from knowing who you are, even when everyone else forgets. Maria would have understood why I delivered that envelope, not for revenge, for clarity, for closure, for our son to remember that his roots have value, even if his wife can't see them. And most of all, because sometimes silence is no longer love. It's surrender. 30 days passed quickly. The notice was delivered, the deadline set. And just like that, the house I gave away without a second thought was mine again. By law and by consequence. No drama, no legal tricks, just the truth, delivered on paper. I didn't show up when they moved out. I didn't need to. The property manager sent photos after the final walkthrough. The kitchen was stripped of all Brooke's shiny decor. The walls, once filled with curated art prints and mood lighting, were bare again, and in the corner of the living room a single nail stuck out from where a canvas had been torn down too fast. The place looked empty,
But not in a sad way, in a clean way, like a wound that had finally been allowed to scab over. The neighbors said they saw a moving truck early that morning, Brooke giving directions, Adam with his head low, shoulders hunched, barely speaking. I didn't ask where they went. It wasn't my concern anymore. I'd carried their weight long enough. That weekend I drove to the property myself. I didn't go inside, just stood in the front yard with a small trowel and a flat of flowers I picked up from the nursery. Maria's favorites. Marigolds, yellow and bright like sunrise. I planted them by the porch where Adam used to sit with me as a kid while we ate ice cream and counted passing cars. The soil gave easily under my hands. It felt good to do something that left beauty behind, not just boundaries, something that made the space feel like mine again, on my terms. As I watered the roots, a breeze passed through, rustling the old wind chime that still hung near the porch light. I hadn't realized it was still there. It was Maria's. I smiled. I didn't feel proud. I didn't feel guilty. I just felt done. For the first time in years, that house didn't carry the smell of obligation or unspoken resentment. It smelled like wet soil, like fresh beginnings, like something I could walk away from, peacefully, knowing I'd finally stopped giving to people who only knew how to take. Had failed. It was a Thursday evening when he knocked. I hadn't heard from Adam in nearly a month. The last message I received was a voicemail that said, "I get it, Dad. I guess you finally made your point." No emotion, no apology, just that flat resignation people offer when they think the door's permanently closed. But now he was standing on my porch, suit wrinkled, eyes tired, and something about him looked older, like life had taken a little more than he expected. I opened the door and didn't say a word. "Hey," he said, barely above a whisper. I stepped aside. He walked in slowly, eyes scanning the house like he was seeing it for the first time. The fresh paint on the walls, the new recliner, the absence of anything that once belonged to him. He sat on the edge of the couch, careful not to lean back too far, like he didn't quite feel welcome, and maybe in that moment he wasn't. "Dad," he said after a pause, "I need to say I'm sorry." I said nothing, just looked at him. "For everything," he continued. "Christmas, the wedding, the house, the things Brooke said, the things I let her say. I should have defended you. I should have stood up to them a long time ago." He swallowed hard, eyes shining. "I let her decide who belonged in my life. And somewhere in all that, I stopped being your son. I let people rewrite the story of who you were, who Mom was. I knew it was wrong. I just didn't know how to stop it." He reached into his jacket and pulled out a folded piece of paper. A letter I found for Mom. She wrote it when I was 12. Said if I ever forgot what love looked like, I should look for the person who stayed, even when they weren't invited. He looked up at me. "That was you." My throat tightened, but I kept my voice steady. It always was. He blinked fast. "Is it too late?" "No," I said, "but it's going to take more than an apology to build back something you helped break." His nod came slow, humbled, honest. And for the first time in years, I saw my son again. "I forgave you months ago," I said, looking him in the eyes. His face shifted, like he hadn't expected those words. Maybe he thought I'd still be angry. Maybe he hoped I was. Anger is easier to argue with than silence. But what he didn't understand, what I finally did, was that forgiveness doesn't mean forgetting, and it certainly doesn't mean starting over, like nothing ever happened. "I forgave you," I repeated, "but that doesn't mean I want things to go back to how they were." He leaned forward. "Then, what does it mean?" "It means," I said slowly, "that if you want a relationship with me now, you have to build it, brick by brick. Not out of guilt, not out of convenience, but out of respect. Earned. Chosen." He nodded. "I can do that." "It also means," I continued,
That I'm not your bank anymore. I'm not your buffer. I'm not your insurance policy when things fall apart. You're a grown man, Adam, and grown men fix what they break, on their own dime. He lowered his eyes, then looked at me again. I understand. I stood up and walked over to the fireplace mantel. Maria's photo sat next to a newer one, me with Rosa and her family on Easter, smiling, relaxed, unburdened. You know what real family looks like? I asked. It looks like showing up, not just when it's easy or when there's something to gain, but even when it's uncomfortable, especially then. He stayed quiet. I turned back to him. You let your wife and her parents convince you that I didn't belong, that I was just some obstacle to manage. But I was never the one in the way. I was the one who cleared it, for you. He breathed out hard, chest rising. You're right. You'll figure it out, I said. You'll build something honest or you won't. That part's not up to me anymore. He stood, nodded once, and moved toward the door. At the threshold, he looked back. Thank you for not slamming the door. I didn't, I said, but I did change the locks. Spring arrived in Spokane like a quiet apology. The trees bloomed slower this year, but more vibrant, like they were making up for lost time. I stood on my back porch, coffee in one hand, the other resting on the railing I finally had time to repair. The air smelled like fresh paint, warm soil, and peace. My phone buzzed with a message from Rosa. Dinner Sunday. The kids want to show you their science projects. I smiled, typed back, wouldn't miss it. For the first time in years, my days weren't scheduled around someone else's emergencies. I wasn't waiting for the next request, the next guilt trip, the next half-hearted thank you. I was living. Fully. Finally. Adam called every now and then, not for money, not for bailouts, just to talk. We weren't what we once were, but we were something again. And this time we were building slow, careful, honest. Brick by brick, like I told him. As for Brooke, I haven't heard from her since they moved out. Maybe that's for the best. Some people don't learn until the applause fades and there's no one left to impress. I still drive past that house sometimes, the one I gave, then reclaimed. The new tenants are kind. A young couple expecting their first child. They asked me if they could paint the nursery. I said yes without hesitation. It felt good to say yes again, on my terms. I've learned that silence isn't always noble. Sometimes it's just self-erasure dressed up as patience. And I'm done disappearing in the name of keeping the peace. You can love someone deeply and still walk away. You can forgive without returning to the fire. You can finally choose yourself, and it's not selfish. It's necessary. I didn't serve eviction papers out of revenge. I served them because a boundary needed to be drawn, once and for all. Not just on paper, but in spirit. Because that house wasn't the line they crossed, I was, and they won't cross it again. If this story moved you, take a moment to like the video and subscribe to the channel. Have you ever been pushed aside by the very people you loved most? Share your thoughts in the comments. Someone out there might need to hear your truth, too. And if you're ready for the next story, click the box on your screen now. Another father's voice is waiting to be heard.